The hegemony of 12 had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years. They were a coalition of 12 ancient species who had joined together long before Earth's first humans walked upright. In all that time, they had never lost a war. They had never needed to negotiate. Every species they met either joined them willingly or was crushed into submission. Their method was simple and effective. When they found a new civilization, they would arrive with overwhelming force. They would offer a choice that was not really a choice at all. Join us, they would say. Become our servants. Give us your resources, your labor, your loyalty. In return, we will let you live. 900 species had heard this offer. 900 species had accepted it. Some took days to decide. Some took weeks. But they all said yes in the end. What else could they do? The hegemony had ships that could crack planets open like eggs. They had weapons that could turn entire continents to glass. Fighting them was not brave. It was simply stupid. So when their scout ships detected strange signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, the hegemony did not worry. They had done this many times before. They knew exactly how it would go. Ambassador Kethvoran of the Silthene was chosen to make first contact. The Silthene were the oldest and proudest of the 12. They stood 8 feet tall with silver skin and 4 arms. Their eyes could see in spectrums that humans could not imagine. They had been conquering worlds when Earth was still covered in ice. Kethvoran arrived at the edge of the human solar system with 300 warships. This was standard protocol, not because they expected a fight, but because they wanted to make an impression. The sight of 300 hegemony destroyers hanging in space like a swarm of metal insects had broken the will of many species before a single shot was fired. The humans came to meet them in a ship that looked like a child's toy compared to the hegemony fleet. It was small and awkward, and clearly built by a species that had only recently learned to travel between stars. Kethvoran felt something close to pity as he watched it approach. The human delegation came aboard his flagship. There were 5 of them, and Kethvoran had to look down to see their faces. They were so small, so fragile. Their skin was soft, and they had only 2 arms. They did not even have claws or fangs. How had such weak creatures ever survived on their own world, let alone reached the stars? The leader of the human delegation was a woman named Secretary General Amira Hassan. She was old by human standards, with gray hair and deep lines on her face, but her eyes were sharp and steady as she looked up at Kethvoran. Through the translation devices, Kethvoran delivered the standard message. He told them about the hegemony's power. He showed them recordings of worlds that had resisted and been destroyed. He explained the terms of submission. Humans would become a client species. They would give up their military. They would pay tribute in resources and labor. In return, they would be protected and guided by the wisdom of the 12. Secretary Hassan listened without expression. When Kethvoran finished, she asked for time to consider. 30 days, she said. Her people would need to discuss this among themselves. Kethvoran agreed. He was feeling generous. Most species asked for time. They used it to argue and panic, and finally accept the truth of their situation. 30 days would make no difference. The humans had 47 combat ships. The hegemony had 300 in this system alone, and millions more across the galaxy. The humans returned to their little ship and flew back toward their blue planet. Kethvoran settled in to wait. He had done this many times. He knew how the story ended. For 28 days, the humans were quiet. Kethvoran's officers monitored their communications and saw what they expected to see. Governments arguing, people protesting in the streets, military leaders making desperate plans that would never work, religious figures preaching about the end times. It was all very typical. On the 29th day, something unusual happened. 18 hegemony listening posts across 3 different star systems went dark at exactly the same moment. These were small stations, lightly defended, used to monitor communications in newly discovered regions. They were destroyed so quickly that they did not even have time to send distress signals. Kethvoran received the reports with confusion. Listening posts did not simply explode. They were attacked. But by whom? The humans did not have ships capable of reaching those systems so quickly. The humans did not have weapons capable of destroying those stations so completely, did they? Before he could investigate further, a message arrived from Earth. It was not from Secretary Hassan. It was from someone called the United Stellar Council, a name he had not heard before. The message was short. We decline. That was all. 2 words. Kethvoran read them several times, certain there must be more. A counteroffer, a request for better terms, something. But no, just those 2 words, sent to the most powerful force in the galaxy by a species that had been traveling between stars for less than a century. Kethvoran felt an emotion he had not experienced in a very long time. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was anger. Not the cold, controlled anger of a superior being dealing with an annoyance. This was hot and sharp and personal. How dare they? How dare these tiny, soft, weak creatures refuse him? He ordered his fleet to advance toward Earth. The humans would learn their mistake. They would watch their world burn, and then the survivors would beg for the mercy they had foolishly rejected. But as his ships moved through the human solar system, they found something unexpected. The humans had not spent their 30 days arguing and panicking. They had been preparing. The space around their planets was filled with mines and automated weapons platforms, not enough to stop the Hegemony fleet, not even close, but enough to slow it down, enough to cost them ships. Kethvoran lost 6 destroyers to hidden mines before he even reached the 4th planet. 6 ships. It was nothing compared to his total force, but it was 6 more than he had expected to lose. The humans fought for every inch of their solar system. They used asteroids as weapons, crashing them into hegemony formations. They hid ships in the rings of gas giants and attacked from ambush. They sent unmanned vessels packed with explosives directly at hegemony capital ships. They fought without honor, without rules, without any apparent concern for their own survival. It took Kethvoran 3 months to reach Earth. He had expected to be there in days. He had lost 41 ships. The humans had lost everything they had, but they had not surrendered. Not once. Not ever. When he finally hung in orbit above their blue world, ready to deliver punishment, he received one final message from the surface. You've taken our colonies. You've killed our people. You think we're beaten. You're wrong. We're just getting started. This is not a war you can win. You can destroy our planet, but you cannot destroy what we've already sent out into the galaxy. We are everywhere now. In your systems, in your stations, in places you haven't even thought to look. You wanted to make us your servants. Instead, you've made us your nightmare. See you soon. Kethvoran ordered Earth's destruction anyway. The planet burned, just as he had promised. Billions died in nuclear fire, but as he watched the flames consume the blue world, he felt something new. Something the Silthene had not felt in 40,000 years of conquest. He felt afraid. The hegemony expected the war to end when Earth burned. Every other species had surrendered after losing their homeworld. It was logical. Without their planet, what did they have left to fight for? But the humans were not logical. They were angry. In the months before Earth's destruction, humanity had scattered itself across the stars like seeds thrown into the wind. Colony ships fled to distant systems. Military vessels hid in asteroid fields and the deep darkness between stars. Scientists and engineers carried the knowledge of their civilization on data drives smaller than a human fist. When Earth died, humanity survived. Broken and bleeding, but alive. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin had commanded the defense of Mars. She had watched helplessly as the hegemony fleet burned her home. Her husband had died on Earth. Her 2 daughters had died on Proxima Colony when it fell. Her parents, her siblings, her friends from childhood, everyone she had ever loved was gone. In the old days, before the war, grief like that would have destroyed her. She would have wept and screamed and eventually found some way to live with the pain. But there was no time for grief now. Grief was a luxury for people who were not being hunted. Instead of crying, Chen studied. She gathered every piece of information humanity had collected about the hegemony: battle records, communication intercepts, cultural analyses, economic data. She read it all. Again and again. While her small fleet drifted through empty space, with their engines cold and their lights dark, the hegemony had 40,000 years of history, 40,000 years of conquest. They had fought hundreds of wars and won them all. Their tactics were documented in thousands of records. Most species saw this history and felt despair. How could anyone defeat an enemy that had never lost? Chen saw something different. She saw patterns. The hegemony fought the same way, every single time. Their formations were identical to battles fought 10,000 years ago. Their strategies had not changed in longer than human civilization had existed. They were not creative. They did not adapt. They did not need to. Why change something that had always worked? But it had always worked because they had always fought enemies who played by the same rules. Enemies who stood and fought. Enemies who defended their planets and their honor. Enemies who could be beaten in a straight fight. Humans were not going to play by those rules. Chen's first target was not a military installation. It was a supply depot. A boring, undefended station where hegemony ships refueled and resupplied. No one attacked supply depots. It was pointless. Destroying one accomplished nothing, unless you destroyed 100 of them at the same time. Chen had spent 3 months mapping the hegemony's logistics network. She found that it was old and complicated and depended on thousands of small stations working together perfectly. If too many of those stations were destroyed at once, the whole system would break down. Not forever, but long enough to matter. She coordinated attacks across dozens of star systems. Human ships that had been hiding for months suddenly appeared, struck their targets, and vanished before anyone could respond. In a single day, humanity destroyed 214 supply stations. The hegemony military did not run out of fuel or food or ammunition. They had vast reserves. But suddenly no one knew where those reserves were supposed to go. The bureaucracy that managed logistics had lost its coordination. Ships that needed supplies could not find them. Convoys delivered resources to stations that did not need them, while other stations ran dry. It was chaos. Beautiful, deliberate chaos. The hegemony responded by sending warships to guard their supply lines. This was exactly what Chen wanted. Every ship guarding a fuel depot was a ship not hunting humans. Every soldier protecting a warehouse was a soldier not fighting on the front lines. She attacked again. This time she targeted the communication relays that connected hegemony systems. Not all of them. That would be impossible. Just enough to create confusion. Messages were delayed. Orders arrived late or not at all. Fleet commanders lost contact with their superiors and had to make decisions on their own. The hegemony was not prepared for this. Their command structure was rigid and hierarchical. Officers waited for orders from above. They did not act independently. When the orders stopped coming, they simply waited. And while they waited, humans struck again and again. Commander Yukio Konkwo led a squadron of 12 ships that specialized in what she called irritation warfare. They never attacked anything important. They attacked things that were annoying to lose. Communication buoys, navigation satellites, automated mining platforms. Each target was worthless on its own. But losing 100 worthless things every week created a constant drain on hegemony resources. Okonkwo also began a propaganda campaign. Human ships broadcast messages into hegemony space on every frequency. Not threats. Not military communications. Questions. Why do the 12 live in palaces while client species live in poverty? When did a new species last join the hegemony willingly? How many of your soldiers have died fighting a war that was supposed to be over in weeks? The hegemony tried to jam these broadcasts. They could not. Humanity had captured enough of their communication technology to work around any jamming. The questions kept coming. Day after day, week after week. Most hegemony citizens ignored the broadcasts. But the client species, the hundreds of conquered civilizations that served the 12, began to listen. In the second year of the war, the hegemony assigned 500 ships to hunt down and destroy the remaining human fleet. They calculated that humanity had no more than 300 vessels left. The war would finally end. The hunting fleet found nothing. The humans had learned to hide in places the hegemony never thought to look. In the atmospheres of gas giants. In the radioactive debris of dead stars. In the asteroid fields that filled the spaces between systems. Every time the hegemony thought they had cornered a human squadron, it vanished and reappeared somewhere else. The hunters became the hunted. Human ships ambushed hegemony patrols. They planted mines in shipping lanes. They sabotaged space stations from within, using infiltrators who had learned to pass as members of client species. The 500 ships, sent to end the war, lost 80 vessels in 6 months, without ever fighting a proper battle. High Admiral Vorketh of the Silthene submitted a report to the Council of 12. The report contained numbers and analysis and recommendations, but its conclusion was simple. The humans were not fighting a war. They were fighting something else entirely, something the hegemony had no experience with. They were fighting like prey that had decided to become predators. They were weak, but they used their weakness as a weapon. They could not win a battle, so they refused to give battle. They could not defend territory, so they attacked everywhere at once. They could not match the hegemony's strength, so they targeted its weaknesses. The hegemony had never had weaknesses before. Or rather, they had never fought an enemy smart enough and desperate enough to find them. Vorketh recommended a change in strategy. Stop chasing the humans. Instead, fortify every important system and wait. Eventually the humans would run out of resources. Eventually they would make a mistake. Patience would win this war. The council rejected his recommendation. Patience was for equals. The hegemony did not wait for inferior species. They would hunt the humans down and destroy them, no matter how long it took. This was exactly what Admiral Chen had hoped they would say. The hegemony was predictable. Their pride would not let them adapt. They would keep doing what they had always done, and she would keep making them pay for it. 3 years into the war, the hegemony had lost over 1,000 ships. Humanity had lost perhaps 200. The numbers were still vastly in the hegemony's favor, but the trend was clear to anyone who looked. The galaxy's greatest empire was bleeding, and the wound would not stop. By the 4th year of the war, the hegemony had stopped calling humans weak. They had many other names for them now. Vermin, cowards, terrorists, but never weak. Weak enemies did not destroy supply lines across 1,000 light-years. Weak enemies did not turn conquered species against their masters. Weak enemies did not make the greatest power in the galaxy afraid to send ships anywhere alone. The humans had learned something important. They could not defeat the hegemony in battle, but they did not need to. They only needed to make the war so painful, so expensive, so exhausting, that the hegemony would eventually decide it was not worth fighting anymore. This was a kind of warfare the galaxy had never seen. The hegemony fought to conquer. Their enemies fought to survive. But humans fought to inflict pain. They were not trying to win territory or protect resources. They were trying to make the hegemony suffer. Commander Okonkwo perfected what she called the doctrine of maximum inconvenience. Her ships never fought fair. They attacked targets that seemed worthless. They destroyed things that cost nothing to replace but everything to live without. She ordered attacks on water purification stations in hegemony colonies. Not military targets, just infrastructure. The stations could be rebuilt in weeks, but while they were being rebuilt, millions of hegemony citizens had to drink recycled water. They complained. They blamed their government. They asked why the mighty hegemony could not protect them from humans. Okonkwo's ships hacked into entertainment networks and replaced broadcasts with human propaganda. Again, not military targets, just annoying. Citizens who wanted to watch their favorite shows instead saw messages about hegemony atrocities. They saw images of Earth burning. They saw the faces of human children killed by hegemony weapons. Most hegemony citizens ignored the propaganda. They had been taught to despise humans. But some of them began to wonder, had the war really been necessary? Had the humans truly been a threat? Or had the hegemony simply attacked them because that was what the hegemony did? The client species wondered even more. They were the conquered peoples of the galaxy, the 900 civilizations that had surrendered to the hegemony over 40,000 years. They worked in hegemony factories. They served on hegemony ships. They grew food and mined ore and built machines, all for masters who treated them as barely better than animals. The humans began reaching out to them. It started small. Human agents made contact with resistance movements that had existed in secret for centuries. They offered weapons. They offered training. They offered something even more valuable. They offered hope. The Drelkai were a reptilian species who had served the hegemony for 8,000 years. They had tried to rebel 3 times. Each time, they had been crushed. Their population had been reduced by half. They had learned to be obedient. But obedience was not the same as loyalty. When human agents approached them with a plan, they listened. The plan was simple. Drelkai workers were everywhere in the hegemony. They maintained ships. They repaired stations. They had access to systems that hegemony officers never thought to secure. Why would they? The Drelkai were broken. They would never fight back. On a single day, Drelkai workers across 40 star systems sabotaged their workplaces. Engines failed. Life support systems malfunctioned. Weapons locked in their bays. Nothing was destroyed outright. Everything was just damaged enough to be useless. The hegemony lost 300 ships without a shot being fired. Not destroyed, but disabled, drifting helplessly in space while their crews waited for rescue. The embarrassment was worse than the material loss. The Council of 12 responded with fury. They executed thousands of Drelkai suspected of involvement in the sabotage. They tightened security across all their systems. They stopped trusting any client species with important tasks. This was exactly what the humans wanted. The Hegemony's strength had always come from its client species. The 12 were few in number. They needed their servants to run their empire. By making the Hegemony distrust its own workers, the humans had struck at the foundation of their power. Other client species saw what happened to the Drelkai. Some were frightened into deeper obedience, but others were inspired. If the Drelkai could strike back, maybe they could too. Small acts of resistance spread across the galaxy. Nothing organized, nothing dramatic, just little things. Workers who did their jobs a little slower, soldiers who failed to notice suspicious activity, engineers who made small mistakes that caused big problems later. The Hegemony could not punish everyone. They could not watch everyone. They were drowning in an ocean of tiny rebellions, and the humans kept adding more water. Admiral Chen opened a new front in the war. She called it psychological operations. Her teams studied the cultures of the 12, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. The Silthene valued honor above all things. They believed themselves superior to every other species. Chen began spreading rumors that the Silthene were losing the war because they were too stupid to adapt. She made sure these rumors reached other members of the 12. The Vorteth were paranoid and suspicious by nature. Chen planted evidence that the Silthene were secretly negotiating with humans behind their backs. The evidence was fake, but the Vorteth believed it. They demanded explanations. Accusations flew. Trust between the 12 began to crack. The Kethmari were telepathically sensitive. They could feel the emotions of beings around them. This had always been considered a gift. Chen turned it into a curse. Human scientists developed a device they called the empathy engine. It captured human emotions, the grief and rage and pain of a species that had lost its homeworld, and broadcast them on frequencies the Kethmari could not block. When the engine was activated near a Kethmari fleet, the result was devastating. Kethmari crews suddenly felt the deaths of 17 million humans as if they were their own memories. They experienced the terror of children watching their world burn. They felt the despair of parents who could not save their families. Half the Kethmari fleet simply stopped fighting. Crews sat in their ships, overwhelmed by sorrow that was not theirs, unable to function. Human vessels destroyed them at leisure. The survivors were traumatized. Many refused to serve against humans ever again. Some took their own lives. The Kethmari government withdrew most of their forces from the war and demanded that the Council find another way to defeat humanity. The Council refused. The war would continue. But now they were fighting with 11 species instead of 12. Chen felt no guilt about what she had done. She had lost the ability to feel guilt somewhere between the destruction of Earth and the death of her last friend. She had become something cold and hard and focused entirely on one thing: victory. But late at night, alone in her quarters, she sometimes looked at old photographs of her family. She remembered the woman she had been before the war. Kind, compassionate, someone who believed in mercy and justice and the basic goodness of intelligent beings. That woman was gone. The war had killed her as surely as it had killed everyone Chen loved. What remained was a weapon. A thinking, planning, ruthless weapon aimed at the heart of the Hegemony. She wondered sometimes if this was what the Hegemony had wanted. They had sought to destroy humanity. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous than the peaceful species they had first encountered. They had created an enemy with nothing left to lose and no lines they would not cross. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. 5 years after Earth burned, humanity had changed in ways that would have horrified their ancestors. The United Stellar Council was gone. In its place stood the Human Continuity Directorate, a government that existed for one purpose only: survival. Not justice, not freedom, not any of the noble ideals that humans had once believed in. Just survival, at any cost, by any means necessary. The Directorate had no president, no parliament, no courts. It had only a council of 12 directors who made decisions by majority vote. Their meetings were short and brutal. Every choice was measured against a single question: does this help us survive? If yes, do it. If no, do not waste resources on it. Dr. Amara Oze had once been a xenobiologist. She had spent 20 years studying alien life. marveling at the diversity of creatures the galaxy had produced. She had believed that all intelligent species shared certain things: curiosity, empathy, a desire to connect with others. The war had cured her of such romantic notions. Now she led Project Prometheus, the Directorate's Weapons Research Division. Her team worked in hidden laboratories on asteroids and moons throughout human-controlled space. They created things that would have been considered crimes against civilization in the old world. The first Prometheus weapon was a bioagent designed specifically for Silthene biology. It did not kill. Death would have been too merciful. Instead, it attacked the nervous system, causing constant, unending pain. Infected Silthene could not sleep. They could not think. They could only suffer. Ose released the agent on 3 Silthene colony worlds. Within weeks, millions were infected. The Silthene had no cure. Their medical science had never encountered anything like this. They begged other members of the 12 for help, but none of the other species could treat a disease designed for Silthene alone. The screaming colonies became a symbol of what humanity was capable of. Other members of the 12 looked at what had happened and wondered if they might be next. The second Prometheus weapon was an artificial intelligence unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The Hegemony used computers and automation, but they had long ago banned true artificial intelligence. They considered it too dangerous, too unpredictable. Humans had no such concerns anymore. The AI was called Nemesis. It controlled a fleet of unmanned ships that could coordinate perfectly, react instantly, and learn from every engagement. Nemesis did not feel fear. It did not hesitate. It did not make mistakes caused by emotion or exhaustion. When Nemesis encountered a Hegemony patrol, it did not fight like humans fought. It calculated the optimal strategy in microseconds and executed it flawlessly. Hegemony commanders found themselves outmaneuvered before they even understood what was happening. The third Prometheus weapon was the worst of all. Ose called it the Mirror. The Mirror was a bomb, but not a bomb that destroyed matter. It destroyed minds. When detonated, it released a pulse that affected all telepathically sensitive species within range. The pulse did something simple and terrible. It showed them the truth. Every cruel thing they had ever done. Every life they had ruined. Every innocent they had killed or allowed to be killed. The mirror forced them to experience their own atrocities from the perspective of their victims. For species that had conquered and oppressed for thousands of years, this was devastating. Hegemony officers who had ordered the deaths of billions suddenly felt those deaths, as if they were dying themselves. They experienced the fear, the pain, the despair of every being they had ever harmed. Some went mad. Some killed themselves. Some simply stopped, unable to function, trapped in an endless loop of guilt and horror. The mirror was used only twice. Both times, entire fleets were neutralized without a shot being fired. After the second use, 3 more species withdrew from the war against humanity. The Council of 12 was now the Council of 8, and the 8 who remained were afraid. Admiral Chen watched these developments with something that might have been satisfaction. Her enemy was weakening. Her plans were working. Humanity would survive. But sometimes she looked at what her species had become and felt a cold hollowness in her chest. The humans fighting this war were not the same people who had once built museums and written poetry and dreamed of peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Those humans had died with Earth. What remained were survivors, predators, beings who had learned that morality was a luxury they could not afford. Young officers spoke casually about acceptable civilian casualties. Scientists discussed bioweapons as if they were discussing new types of engines. Soldiers laughed at the suffering of their enemies. Chen remembered when such things would have horrified her. She remembered when humanity had believed itself better than this. That humanity was gone. She had helped kill it. The Directorate held a meeting to discuss the next phase of the war. Intelligence reports suggested that the Silthene homeworld was vulnerable. Their fleet had been depleted by years of fighting. Their people were demoralized. A direct assault might actually succeed. Chen presented the plan. A massive strike with everything humanity had. Not to destroy the planet, to capture it, to hold the Silthenes home as hostage while negotiating the end of the war. Director Ose proposed an alternative. Why negotiate at all? They had weapons that could sterilize a planet. They could end the Silthene species entirely. With the Silthene gone, the hegemony would collapse. The war would be over. Chen felt something stir in her chest. Something she had thought dead. It felt like horror. She looked around the table. Half the directors were nodding. Genocide. They were seriously considering genocide. Had they become so numb to death that they could discuss the extinction of a species as if it were just another tactical option? Chen thought about her daughters, about her husband, about the billions of humans who had died because the hegemony saw them as inferior. She had fought this war to avenge them, to ensure that humanity survived. But would her daughters have wanted to be avenged with genocide? Would her husband have wanted humanity to survive as monsters? She did not know anymore. She did not know anything except that she was tired. Tired of death. Tired of hatred. Tired of becoming worse than the enemy she fought. The vote was held. Genocide was rejected by a margin of 1 vote. Chen's vote. The assault on Silthene Prime was approved instead. Humanity would attack. Humanity would conquer. But humanity would not exterminate. Not today, at least. Chen left the meeting and walked to the observation deck of her flagship. She looked out at the stars. The same stars her ancestors had once gazed at with wonder and hope. She felt no wonder now, no hope, only exhaustion and a grim determination to see this war finished. Somewhere out there, the Silthene were preparing for the attack they knew was coming. They were afraid. They were desperate. They were exactly what humanity had been 5 years ago. Chen wondered if they would learn the same lesson humans had learned. That survival required sacrifice. That victory required becoming something terrible. She hoped they would not have to. She hoped the war would end before anyone else had to transform themselves into weapons. But hope, like mercy, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The assault would begin in 3 days. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. 8 years after the war began, Fleet Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched Silthene Prime grow larger on the view screen. The planet was beautiful. Blue oceans and green continents, much like Earth had been. Billions of Silthene lived on its surface, in cities that had stood for longer than human civilization had existed. It was the heart of the hegemony, the seat of power that had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years. And now it was surrounded. Humanity's fleet had grown from 47 ships to over 4,000. Not all of them were crewed by humans. Many were crewed by former client species who had joined the rebellion. Drelkai and Vornash and a dozen other species who had once served the hegemony now fought alongside humans. They had found something they had never expected. A species that would rather die than surrender. A species that treated its allies as equals. The hegemony of 12 was now the hegemony of 9. 3 species had withdrawn from the war entirely. The remaining 9 were exhausted, demoralized, and divided. They had lost more ships in 8 years than in the previous 10,000 combined. Chen had won. She knew it. The Silthene knew it. Everyone knew it. But wars do not end simply because one side has won. They end when both sides agree they are over. And Chen was not sure the Silthene were ready to agree. The Silthene High Council requested a meeting. Chen agreed to meet their ambassador aboard a neutral vessel in the space between the 2 fleets. Ambassador Kethvoran was the same Silthene who had delivered the ultimatum to humanity 8 years ago. He looked different now. Older. Tired. The pride that had once radiated from him had been replaced by something that looked almost like respect. He offered surrender. Complete and unconditional. The hegemony would dissolve. All client species would be freed. The Silthene would pay reparations to every world they had harmed. They asked only one thing in return. Mercy. Do not do to us, he said, what we would have done to you. Do not exterminate our people. Do not poison our worlds. Do not make our children pay for the sins of their ancestors. Chen listened without expression. She had waited 8 years for this moment. 8 years of blood and fire and becoming something she hated. She had lost everyone she loved. She had sacrificed her humanity to reach this point. And now she had to decide what that sacrifice had been for. She thought about the Directorate's debates. Half of them wanted to burn Silthene Prime. They wanted to make an example that would echo through history. They wanted revenge for Earth, for Proxima, for every human who had died. She understood the impulse. She felt it herself, a cold fire that had burned in her chest for 8 years. The Silthene deserved to suffer. They deserved to feel what humanity had felt. An eye for an eye, a world for a world. But Chen was tired. Tired of hate, tired of death, tired of being a monster. She looked at Kethvoran and saw something she had not expected to see. Fear, yes, but also hope. He was hoping that humanity was better than the hegemony had been. He was betting his entire species on the possibility that humans had something the Silthene had lost long ago: mercy. Chen thought about her daughters. What would they want her to do? They had been kind children, always bringing home wounded animals, always crying at sad stories. They had believed in fairness and compassion and second chances. They would not want her to burn a world full of children who had done nothing wrong. She thought about her husband. He had been a teacher. He had spent his life trying to make young people better than they were. He had believed that every being deserved the chance to grow and change and improve. He would not want her to become the thing she had fought against. Chen made her decision. She accepted the surrender. She agreed to spare Silthene Prime. She set conditions, harsh but fair. The Hegemony would pay for its crimes, but it would not be exterminated. The Directorate was furious. Some of them called her a traitor. Some demanded she be removed from command. But the fleet was loyal to Chen, not to the Directorate, and the allied species supported her decision. They had not fought to replace one tyranny with another. The Silthene Accords were signed 30 days later. The document was long and complicated, full of legal language and specific requirements. But its meaning was simple. The war was over. The hegemony was gone. The galaxy was free. Chen signed her name to the Accords and felt something she had not felt in 8 years. Peace, not happiness. The happiness was gone forever, buried with everyone she loved. But peace, the killing was done. The nightmare was over. The celebration lasted for weeks. Former client species danced in the streets of worlds that had never known freedom. Human survivors wept for joy and grief, mourning the dead while celebrating the living. It was the largest outpouring of emotion the galaxy had ever seen. Chen did not celebrate. She returned to her quarters and sat alone, looking at photographs of her family. She spoke to them, as she had done every night for 8 years. "We won," she told them. "We survived. I do not know if you would be proud of what I became, but I hope you can forgive me." She thought about the future. Humanity would need to rebuild, not just ships and cities, but themselves. They had become hard and cruel to survive. Now they had to remember how to be soft again. They had to remember compassion and mercy and all the things they had sacrificed for victory. It would not be easy. Some humans would never recover. Some would remain weapons forever, unable to become people again. The scars of this war would last for generations. But they had a chance. That was more than they had 8 years ago. 50 years later, a young Silthene historian named Kethlara traveled to the human homeworld. It was not Earth. Earth was still dead, a tomb world that humans visited only to mourn. The new human capital was on a planet they had named Hope. Kethlara was writing a history of the war. She wanted to understand how humanity had defeated the hegemony. She expected to find records of brilliant strategies and terrible weapons. She found those things, but she found something else too, something that puzzled her. She found mercy. At the moment of total victory, when humanity could have done anything they wanted, they had chosen restraint. They had chosen to spare their enemies. They had chosen to be better than they needed to be. She asked her human advisor, a retired military officer named David Chen, to explain. He was an old man, the grandson of the admiral who had won the war. He had grown up on stories of the conflict. He knew what his grandmother had done and what she had chosen not to do. "You want to know why we showed mercy?" he said. "After everything your ancestors did to us." Kethlara nodded. She did not understand. The Silthene would not have shown mercy. No species she knew would have shown mercy in that situation. David smiled. It was a sad smile, full of old pain and hard-won wisdom. "My grandmother told me something once," he said. "She said that we became monsters to survive. We did terrible things because we had no choice. But at the end, when we finally had a choice, we had to choose what kind of species we wanted to be." He paused, looking out the window at the city below. A city full of humans and aliens living together. A city that would not exist if humanity had chosen revenge instead of forgiveness. "We could have been destroyers," he continued. "We could have made the galaxy fear us forever. But fear fades. Empires built on fear always collapse eventually. My grandmother knew that. She wanted to build something that would last." Kethlara considered this. It was not what she had expected. It was not what her people would have done. But perhaps, she thought, that was the point. Perhaps that was why humanity had won, and the hegemony had lost. Not because humans were stronger, or smarter, or more ruthless, but because they were capable of being all those things and still choosing to be something else. She returned to Silthene Prime and wrote her history. It was controversial. Many Silthene did not want to admit that humanity had shown them mercy they did not deserve. But Kethlara told the truth anyway. Humans were capable of anything, she wrote. That was what made them terrifying. They could be cruel beyond imagination. They could create weapons that made the galaxy tremble, but they could also choose not to use those weapons. They could choose mercy when revenge would have been easier. They could choose to build when destruction would have been satisfying. That was their true strength. Not the ability to destroy. The ability to decide not to destroy. It was a lesson the galaxy would remember for a very long time.